Hey all, so back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about Jean Grey. I'm very excited about this one because this is one of mine, which makes her the first mutant that I've had the opportunity to build. And yeah, each class is a unique experience. Jean was no exception. There's some really cool stuff in here. I'm really, really happy with where she landed. Getting directly into the champion attributes, survivability of 3.5. We made sure Jean wasn't that standard glass cannon, like old school health and block proficiency were low just because she's a woman thing. Um, but she doesn't really have a lot of exceptional tank stats. Most of this survivability comes from her force field, and that can run out, right? So if you play her properly, she can feel very, very tanky, and you can come out of fights with very, very high health. But if you get hit too much, you are going to start notice your health chipping away. So somewhere in the middle, but a little bit north of average, right? 3.5. Damage of 4.5. Jean hits pretty hard. She has a lot of red numbers, most of it being neuroshock or burst damage. You do have to do a little bit of work for it, and it spikes a lot higher against certain skill champions, but the damage is there. We'll kind of talk about some of the unique contours of that as we go. Ease of use 2.5. As is a theme with a lot of modern champions, you can get decent results out of this character by just doing full combos. With her specifically, you would want to end in lights for the ultimate ease of use, and then throwing special attacks. Jean's going to ask you to weave in some heavies as a little bit of a level up, and that's kind of the basics. But I do think 2.5 is accurate here, right? She has some unique challenges built into her rotation that are directly tied to her unique strengths, and we'll talk about that soon. She also definitely benefits if you are comfortable with heavy countering and heavy canceling, and those kinds of things do add some wrinkles, right? Utility of 3, she has some pretty strong utility. Not a ton of it, but everything she has is pretty helpful. She has a Thorns counter, she has near constant uptime on anti-miss. She's immune to reverse controls. Those are kind of the big things. There are a few other pieces sprinkled throughout, but those are all really good, right? It's a smaller package of very strong utility, so I think that lands at about a 3. Defender strength of 3. I imagine a lot of you are going to disagree with this one, and that is because it is honestly a fairly binary defender threat. If you are immune to reverse controls, she's just going to slow you down a little bit. If you are not immune to reverse controls, then how you feel about her is going to depend a lot on how good you are at noticing things and then reacting to them. And so you might think that she's more than a 3, but I do think this is about where it averages out. There have been more champions, especially in the tech class recently, that are immune to reverse controls. She's not that bad. So getting into strengths and weaknesses, one of the most unique things that Jean can do is remove debuffs off of her opponent. We've had characters that play with this a little bit in the past. Like Dust has the ability to purify her own sand debuffs off the opponent, right? Jean can purify an opponent's own debuffs off of them. She can't purify all debuffs, but she can purify all non-damaging debuffs and then her own neuroshocks. And that's really helpful against skill defenders that like to debuff themselves, such as Kingpin or Atuma. Nobody else has ever really been able to do this before, and Jean can. So this isn't normally what we mean when we write debuff control as a strength. She's not keeping debuffs off herself, she's keeping debuffs off the opponent. But that is sometimes a really powerful piece of utility. It's very worth highlighting it here. Second, we've already talked about the force field a bit. If you are familiar with Invisible Woman, this is very similar. If you haven't played her, it's not that different from Penny Parker. But as with both of those others, she has a force field that can absorb damage instead of that damage making its way to her. Eventually, it runs out, it goes on cooldown. For Jean in particular, while it's active, she also has the ability to ignore physical Thorns effects, such as those from Attuma and Korg, and she has a few other pieces of utility as well that we will get to. And then lastly, Jean has a lot of neuroshocks. She has a fair bit of damage in the neuroshocks themselves, and she also just has a high number of them that lead to more damage on top of that. Weaknesses, everything Jean does is energy damage. The neuros are energy damage, the burst damage she does is energy damage, all of her basics, all of her special attacks are energy damage. She might be able to crit through that, but red numbers can't crit. And so high energy resistance is a problem. You do want to keep an eye out for that. Alternatively, if you feel strongly about reverse controls, you might want to bring energy resistance when fighting her. Damage over time is also an issue. The force field does reduce the damage, but it is going to cut through it, and she's not really going to be able to control that. It is a problem, and when the force field is down, it will come back, but she's going to be vulnerable while it's down. And then evade and auto block. Jean needs her special attacks to land. Some opponents, especially techs with auto block, are going to make that difficult. A quick shout out to the defender side of things. Jean does have a few things that trigger on activation of her specials, but none of the damage events of her specials go through block, so anything that stops her from hitting the opponent is a serious blocker. Moving on to the abilities themselves. Jean Grey is an Omega level telepath, so of course, she is immune to reverse controls, and all of her attacks deal energy damage. Her second, third, and fourth light attacks inflict a neuroshock debuff for 18 seconds. You can get up to 20 of these, and as a reminder, while the opponent is under the effects of a neuroshock, your attacks into them cannot miss. This is why Jean is such a strong miss counter, because all she needs to completely shut off miss is the ability to land a second light attack once every 18 seconds. When Jean is struck with or blocks a critical hit, she inflicts an exhaustion debuff for 12 seconds, very similar trigger to Captain Britain. This is mostly defensive, right? It is going to help you out against opponents, especially those that crit through your block. Very nice for that. But this is mostly going to slow down people attacking into her, I will say. And then personal neuroshock passives deal significantly more damage over a bit of a longer duration. You'll see where those come in later, but the important thing here is that the debuffs are a bit weaker and shorter. The passives deal more damage and last longer. You want to get those. They also have a higher stack limit at 35, so you're going to be able to squeeze more damage out of them. On to her force field. Again, similar to Invisible Woman, Jean Grey starts each fight with a force field, strength equal to 10% of her maximum health. The force field is not subject to ability accuracy. This is a difference from Invisible Woman. Having the force field be able to fail made a little bit more sense for a science character that was getting hit by skill champions with defensive ability accuracy reduction. For the exact same reason, it doesn't really make sense for a mutant. So, you can't prevent this, it's just going to happen. Whenever Jean would take damage other than from a special 3, the force field takes 90% of that damage instead. So, right at the start of the fight, she basically gets temporary hit points equal to 10% of her maximum health. She's going to take damage while that field is up, but most of the damage is going to go towards depleting those extra temporary hit points rather than dropping her health bar. If you haven't run into that before, it's very good at mitigating damage. Additionally, while the force field is active, Jean takes no damage from physical Thorns effects. Thorns being defined as bursts of damage while you're hitting the opponent, so this covers Korg, this covers Attuma, this covers Killmonger, but it is restricted to physical Thorns effects, so this will not work on Electro, because his damage back is energy, so calling that out ahead of time. and the opponent's critical damage rating is reduced by a big chunk. So, on top of the force field itself reducing incoming damage, damage specifically from crits is also going to be worse at breaking through that force field. When the force field is depleted, Jean lashes out psychically and inflicts a 30% delirium passive for 8 seconds. As a reminder, the potency of delirium is a combat power rate reduction, so while this delirium is active, the opponent will gain less power from being struck or from striking the opponent. And then delirium also inverts controls, so your dash and dodge controls will be completely inverted unless you are immune to it. It is important to note that the delirium type is not the same thing as the delirium buff node. So robots are not immune to this. Psychic shielding does not protect you. This is just reverse controls. You have to actually be immune to it to avoid it. And what that means is, if you don't like playing around reverse controls, you do have to be careful as Jean's force field starts to get down near 0, because you might be in for a surprise. Similarly, if you are fighting with Jean, and you notice that your force field is about to get depleted, obviously reverse controls doesn't do anything to an AI defender, but it is important to note that they will be gaining significantly less power for the 8 seconds after your force field goes down, and that can be something you use to your advantage. Once this happens, the force field goes on cooldown for 24 seconds, after which it reforms at full strength. However, this cooldown is reduced by 1.5 seconds every time a debuff is purified off the opponent. Jean has ways of purifying debuffs off the opponent, so you can manually speed this up. Additionally, if you are facing somebody who purifies as a matter of course, then you're just going to be getting your force field back that much faster. On the flip side, the cooldown expires 30% more slowly while Jean is poisoned, so she is vulnerable to that in particular. This next section is the newest and weirdest thing she does. So when a debuff is purified or cleansed off the opponent while Jean is not performing a special attack, she gains a 12.5% uncanny passive until the end of her next special attack. She can get 2 of these. Uncanny is a brand new type of effect. It's brand new tech. It is similar to power efficiency, but it is not the same as power efficiency. What Uncanny does is it not only reduces the amount of power consumed by a special, it reduces the amount of power required to throw the special in the first place. So if you have both of these Uncanny passives up for a total of 25%, then you can throw your special 2 when you only have 1.5 bars of power. That is a big reduction, right? And that allows Jean to throw specials earlier and more frequently, right? It fulfills a similar function in her kit that Power Gain would in someone else's. This is a very powerful ability, but I do want to call out that it does make her a little bit trickier to use, right? Because as strong as it is to be able to use your specials when you've only landed 3 hits instead of 4, looking at that 25% reduction, it also means that you only have 3/4 of the potential hits before you then get your next special, right? And so with Jean, where the difference between your special 1 and your special 2 matters quite a bit, it is possible to misplay things and accidentally get too many Uncanny before you were ready, get too much power, and have your special 2 when you would have preferred to throw your special 1. This is very much something that you can learn, and Jean does have some tools that we're going to get to later that help her mitigate this. I don't think that it is a problem that makes her too hard to play, or I would not have shipped it like this. But it is definitely a tighter loop than you might be used to. Again, similar to characters with power gain in their kits, and so I do want to call that out because it doesn't look like power gain, and so it might not feel quite the same. Another thing to call out with this is that the UI does update with this, right? For Jean and anyone in the future who uses this tech, there are little blips on top of the special bars for 1, 2, and 3, and when the uncannies activate, those blips move, and they have little dotted lines below them to show you the new place for where those specials can be activated. However, it's important to note that none of this changes the definition of what a bar of power is, right? As you are looking at that special attack readout, a bar of power is still going to be one full bar, which means that any nodes that grant you blah 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 percent of a bar of power are still going to be granting the same amount. Jean is just going to be telling you that she can use her specials at less than 1, 2, and 3 bars of power. We've talked about this for a while. I know it's weird, but I do think that you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly while playing. If this still isn't making sense, check out the deep dive. It's pretty clear when you're looking at it. So again, the trigger for this new effect is when a debuff is purified or cleansed off the opponent outside of Jean's special attacks. And that's because during her specials, other things happen, right? But specifically purify outside of specials gives her these uncannies. And that also makes sense, right? Because the uncannies go away at the end of the next special attack. You want them before you throw the special so the special costs less. You don't want it during the special. When Jean would gain an uncanny above her max stack, she instead gains an indefinite psionic charge. So again, this is looking for that same purify or cleanse, but this just means that you still benefit from purifies or cleanses after those first 2. Instead of just refreshing the max stacks on your uncanny, you instead get psionic charges, which are a resource that you will then use in your specials later. Now, when a debuff is purified or cleansed off the opponent during Jean's specials, she gains a psionic charge. So that one just skips the middle ground of the uncanny and goes straight to giving her that extra resource. Lastly, when a personal debuff is prevented by ability accuracy reduction, Jean has a 35% chance to gain a psionic charge, but this will not trigger against opponents with psychic shielding. So this isn't a hard punishment to tranquilize or defensive ability accuracy reduction, but it does mean that those methods of controlling debuffs are a little bit less effective against her than they would be elsewhere, because if she's trying to trigger all these debuffs against you all the time, you might be preventing the exhaustions from landing crits against her, but there's a very good chance that you're not preventing all the psionic charges, and if those build up, you're eventually going to get hurt by it. Alright, so moving on to the heavy attack. This first bullet here, if you were wondering how the opponent is going to be purifying debuffs outside Jean's specials, here you go. The first hit purifies up to 3 Neuroshock or non-damaging debuffs off the opponent, and grants Jean 1 psionic charge if the opponent is not stunned. Those are 2 different processes, right? The first hit is going to purify up to 3 debuffs, as long as those debuffs are either Neuroshocks or non-damaging. And then separately, if the opponent is not stunned, Jean's going to gain a psionic charge. So again, this is how you are going to ramp up your uncannies if you're not facing somebody with their own purify triggers. You're going to put debuffs on them, probably the Neuroshocks from your light attacks, then you're going to find a place to land a heavy. That's going to give you your uncannies and make your specials cheaper. The final hit of the heavy inflicts 2 personal Neuroshock debuffs, so it also helps you ramp if you're having trouble getting those lights in. And on top of that, it grants Jean no power if she's above a bar. So, like I said, the definition of a bar of power does not change. This refers to the actual full line, not the dotted one, where you would normally be able to activate a special 1. If you are above that, then the second hit of the heavy grants Jean no power. And that is helpful because it means that you can throw this heavy without worrying nearly as much about getting pushed to your special 2, right? Because heavy attacks grant quite a bit of power. For Jean in particular, most of that power comes from the second hit. And so this just gives you more control over her rotation and helps you manage that feeling of playing somebody with power gain. Again, it's not that, but if you are used to playing characters with heavy Mystic Dispersion, it can feel a little bit in that direction. Moving on, for all special attacks, personal Neuroshock, Daunted, and Delirium effects are paused during Jean's specials. And then after the first hit, meaning of her special 1 and 2, there's a 50% chance to inflict that same 30% delirium passive, but this time for only 2 seconds. This will not trigger if a personal delirium is already active. As an attacker, the chance is 100%. So let's parse the attacker side first. That's easier. This means that after the first hit, the rest of your specials will grant the opponent 30% less power, and then you're going to get 2 seconds of that delirium afterwards as well. Because remember, delirium is one of the effects that's paused during Jean's specials. As a defender, this is a bit more complicated because there's that 50% chance. Don't worry, there is a call-out. So when a defending Jean throws her specials, there's a call-out that tells you if your controls are going to be reversed. And then after that first hit, you can respond to that normally. After that first hit, the delirium will pop up, right? So you have the ability to respond to the call-out. You also have the ability to respond to the effect showing up on your HUD. Either way, you're going to have a little bit of time before she throws the second hit of those specials, because that's the one that your controls are going to be reversed for. This is definitely harder than someone like Emma, but that was the point, right? I'm going to be completely upfront. You'll probably agree with me that once you get used to how Duped Emma Frost works, to a large extent, you're not really dealing with reverse controls with her, you are just learning a different special dex. Yeah, your thumb goes the other way, but that's just how you dex Emma Frost, right? You're not actively thinking about reverse controls each time. And that's probably something you like, but that also means that reverse controls isn't really a threat there. And speaking from a designer's standpoint, we do want reverse controls to sometimes be a threat. And here you go. This one is. I think it's pretty fair. I think we gave you the chance to react to it. Like I said earlier, Jean's damaging effects don't go through block. There's no unblockable in this kit. We're not trying to catch you that way, but we do want this to be something that you're paying attention to. And then lastly, as a defender on activation of these specials, Jean consumes up to 3 psionic charges and inflicts a personal Neuroshock passive for each charge consumed. So this part is very avoidable if you're fighting Jean the way that you should be. I want to be clear. Because for Jean to gain psionic charges as a defender, you have to be trying to stop her debuffs and triggering the ability accuracy clause, or you have to be purifying at least 3 times per special that she throws. You probably shouldn't be doing either of those things, right? And so she will punish you if you are, but really this is just to make sure that skills attacking into her don't feel good, that kind of thing. I wouldn't worry too much about this last bullet. It's not going to come up much in normal fights. Now, Special 1. The first hit of this purifies all Neuroshock and non-damaging debuffs off the opponent, so similar to that first hit of the heavy, except this is a Purify All instead of a Purify 3. And it's going to consume all psionic charges on Jean. For each debuff purified, and for each charge consumed, she inflicts a personal Neuroshock passive. So you can get a lot of passives out of this. And then the final hit inflicts 2 to 4 additional Neuroshock passives. So, a little bit of a random roll there, but you also have guaranteed ramp, even if there are no debuffs on the opponent and no charges on yourself. Bluntly, that also makes this last hit the one that you want to be careful of on defense. Special 2 on activation inflicts a non-stacking Daunted passive for 20 seconds. This is pretty chunky. It's going to juice damage during the Special 2, and it's going to last long enough that you're probably going to get to another Special 2 or maybe another Special 1 or 2 while this is still up, and juice damage during those as well. Each hit of the Special 2 deals a burst of energy damage for each Neuroshock on the opponent and for each Psionic Charge on Jean. So if you manage to convert a lot of these with the Special 1, then your Special 2 is going to do really big red numbers. Again, this cares about any kind of Neuroshock on the opponent, so the debuffs work fine. The passives also work fine. Reminder that the passives are longer and have a higher stack limit, so the ceiling on using them for this is higher. But you can just use lights and go to the Special 2 if you want. And then you're also going to benefit for Psionic Charges on Jean, which on offense are probably going to be building as you are purifying debuffs off the opponent, either with your heavy or because they're purifying them off themselves. The final hit consumes 50% of Psionic Charges, rounded down. This is honestly purely so you don't just spam the Special 2 forever without any upkeep. And that's because this Special 2 is intended as a cash out. You can definitely ramp back up to it, but I do want there to be some ramp. Now, Special 3. Jean adds a flat 100% strength to her force field if it's active, and if it's not active, she reactivates it at full strength, and this bypasses the cooldown, right? So this just lets her force field get stronger and stronger and stronger, and you can build yourself a bigger and bigger shield. The other thing this does is that it inflicts a Neuroshock passive for every 20% of the force field's remaining strength. There is not actually a cap on this. And normally that's not going to matter, because Special 1, Special 2 is going to be significantly more efficient, almost always. We did make sure of that. But I do want to call it out, because if for some reason you're fighting an opponent that's completely debuff immune, the Special 3 might be slower, but it is a way to shortcut directly to the passives, and that might be important. It's also worth shouting out, this attack can be activated for as little as 2.25 bars of power. That does require you to get the Uncannies, which does require the opponent to purify, but this can be really cheap. There are some fun interactions that come from having a Special 3 available before you've built even 2.5 bars of power. And then, signature ability. While Jean's force field is active, using the Parry Mastery instead inflicts a 1.5 second stun passive. So instead of the debuff, you go straight to the passive. You don't have to worry about it getting purified. She doesn't replace it. She just goes straight to the parry, gets a passive, similar to Negasonic, but not quite as long, 1.5 seconds instead of 2 full seconds. Additionally, skill champions cannot reduce the ability accuracy of this stun, so you don't have to worry about their ability accuracy reduction hitting into your block. As long as they can be stunned, you get this stun. Additionally, increased control over her mutation allows Jean to retain one Uncanny passive after her Special 1. This is just the Special 1, but basically it means you have to re-ramp less after the Special 1 to get your Uncannies online for the big Special 2. That's mostly going to be a factor when you're fighting somebody with their own Purify, because otherwise you'd need to throw the heavy and you'd get 2 Uncannies anyway. But even if that's the case, this is going to allow you to get more Psionic Charges from the same number of heavies, and that means that one way or another you're going to get a tempo boost or a damage boost or both out of this. And then lastly, the SIG increases the duration of personal Neuroshock passives by 8 seconds, making them even longer relative to the debuffs and making it more realistic for you to stack more of them for giant Special 2s. Synergy bonuses from the Ashes with both a Revealed Soon and a Coming Soon champion. Those are different, but I'm not going to explain that now. For Jean, Incinerate damage does not reduce the strength of her force field. So, The force field will reduce the damage the Incinerate does to Jean, but the important part is that the damage that gets through and the damage that the force field absorbs doesn't cause it to tick down. This is definitely not an immunity, but if you play carefully, this can read as 90% resistance to Incinerate damage. I thought it was fun. And then all champions on the team gain an extra 10% special damage. As a reminder, this is the same language that the special damage stat focus uses. This is similar to prowess. It increases the damage of the hits. It does not boost red numbers triggered by special attacks. Starcrossed with another revealed soon champion gives Jean 2 psionic charges when she activates a special attack while the opponent is dashing or performing a dash attack. So this does not actually require the first hit of her specials to be an intercept, worth pointing out. It just requires you to hit the button while the opponent's coming at you. Nice way to boost her damage. Mentor with Professor X. For Jean, personal delirium effects gain a flat 20% potency, meaning that they're now a 50% reduction to combat power rate. Pretty potent control ability there. And then for Professor X, this changes the rules on his personal falter and allows it to trigger against special attacks, while normally it can't, as long as he's charging a heavy attack when the opponent activates a special. This is pretty huge for him because it allows you to charge and channel during times when it would have been way too risky to do so with his base kit. As a trade-off, though, if an attack does trigger this falter and then miss, the cooldown is increased by 15 seconds. And so you pay a significant price in the downtime for that falter for taking this risk. The Fire Within with Purgatory. For Jean, crossing a bar of power grants her a Bulwark passive for 10 seconds, just allows her to block better, and that's also going to allow you to stretch the force field further. For Purgatory, she gains the Mutant Crossfight right at the start of her first fight. This is very similar to how the Guillotine Synergy gives her the Mystic Crossfight. If you don't know Purgatory well, the Mutant Crossfight is the one that allows her to power steal the opponent's remaining power at the end of their specials. It's really good. And then Sisters with Storm. The first hit of Jean's heavy attack pauses her personal Daunted for 5 seconds, so you can stretch that out into more specials. And for Storm, canceling out of her heavy attack into a striker or a special pauses all prowess effects on her for 10 seconds. That's the same pause her heavy already has, but this means you don't have to land the heavy. You can still get this pause by canceling into a striker or a special. And you can do that directly from the charge. Very nice ability for Storm, because sometimes when you land the heavy, then it's annoying to have to find another opening for the special. And then I didn't include the screenshot here, but generally as far as stat focus goes, I prefer some kind of defensive stat for Jean on offense, because block proficiency, physical resistance, energy resistance, less so the last one because she has some of her own, but any of those that reduce incoming damage are also going to make the force field last longer, which makes all of the utility associated with the force field last longer as well. That's my personal recommendation. Jean doesn't really care that much about crits or special damage or any of that. And that's Jean. Again, I'm really excited about her. It was fun to finally build a mutant. I think Uncanny is a really neat ability. I expect us to definitely use it again. But yeah, I had fun with this one. I'm going to shut up so I don't just, talk forever. But let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments. Looking forward to that discussion. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.